Make a choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the next chapter of your journey has begun. And along the way, be open to being inspired. Listen to the conversations led by Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, Howard University Interim President, President Emeritus, and Charles R. Drew, Professor of Surgery, on The Journey.
Hello and welcome to The Journey. I'm Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, and today we bring you another interesting episode of The Journey, one rooted in legacy, leadership, and the enduring responsibility of remembrance and action. This episode is titled Genuis, Unbroken, Carrying Forward the Legacy of Dr. Charles R. Drew. Dr. Drew was not only a groundbreaking scientist and a pioneer in blood plasma research, he was also a moral leader, an educator, and a man deeply committed to service and humanity. His brilliance changed medicine. His values continue to shape generations. And here at Howard University, we are honored to serve as a steward of his legacy through our faculty, our students, our medical programs, and our commitment to excellence. Today, we are joined by two remarkable guests who help us bring the story to life in a profound and personal way. First, Dr. Charlew Drew Jarvis, author, educator, former DC Councilwoman and University President, and a daughter of Charles R. Drew. She's the author of the powerful and deeply human new book, Genuis, Unbroken, which captures not only the achievements of Dr. Drew, but also his character, his principles, and his purpose. We are also honored to welcome Dr. Edward E. Cornwell III, the Chair Emeritus and Professor of Surgery here at Howard University, an accomplished surgeon, surgical scholar whose career has been shaped by Dr. Drew's legacy and leadership in medical education. Together, we'll explore what it means to inherit greatness and to live it forward. So join us for a conversation about science, history, and family, and the responsibility of legacy. So let's begin. I'll start with you first, Dr. Drew Jarvis. I am curious about your motivations behind this book in particular. I've heard you tell different parts of the story of your dad in different ways, including in the written word, but this one in particular seems deeply personal. I'm wondering what your motivation behind this one was.
Well, Mr. President, first, thank you so much for having this conversation here at Howard University. Just coming to this campus has reminded me so much of my father and my family. I was delighted to get a call from Dr. Craig Mitchell talking to me about his interest in Dr. Drew. And he had just done a Dr. DeBakey book. And I thought, that's great. You see my father in connection with a luminary with Dr. DeBakey. He was indeed a luminary because he had not only the intellect, but he had the drive and he had the passion to make sure that others were being trained within the African American community, and he believed in excellence. He absolutely believed in excellence. Excellence of performance will overcome any obstacles known to man. That is something that I've heard you say. I have something that I heard Dr. Cornwell say, and it is implanted in our minds, in our family. He demanded excellence.
And for Dr. Cornwell and I always tell people the Department of Surgery inherited Dr. Drew's legacy in a very practical way, and that saying in particular about excellence is one way in which we do that. And even the theme for my presidency is excellence in truth and service. And I recently told a story that my 21-year-old son, who's a professional soccer player, now has a tattoo on his leg. And I was chagrined when I realized he had gotten a tattoo, and then I saw it and I was speechless because it says excellence of performance will transcend all artificial barriers created by man. And so we've inherited that legacy, obviously, and even to my, to my son, he's inherited it. But I'm curious as to, within your household, what was that legacy pass on like? And in a very personal way, as you said, he wanted excellence, but I'm pretty sure he probably provided that to you and your siblings and your family in a very different way.
Well, he did, and I want to remind everyone that when we lost my father, we were very young. I was 8 years old. My sister Bibi was 9. Charlie was 3 years old. Sylvia was 4 years old. But by the time we lost him, we understood exactly what he expected. And what he expected was that we would be excellent. What he expected is that we would be good citizens. What he expected is that we would toe the line and understand that there were rules. So, for example, when there were baseball games, my sister and I would help people park, and we would charge them a quarter. My father found that not to be an acceptable way that little girls would act in the neighborhood. And so that's the kind of thing that we remembered about him. I remember that I cut my foot in front of 328 College Street, where we used to live, and that my mother put me in a little red wagon to bring me to the hospital, because we were only a block away from the hospital, and it was her intention to take me to the hospital in the wagon. But I saw my father coming down the block, and he was very rapidly walking, and his tie was blowing in the back, as was his jacket, and I prayed hard that the bleeding would stop and that my mother would not tell him that I was outside without my shoes. So we knew him to be a disciplinarian, but we also knew him to be a teacher.
Right.
There was no time when my father was not teaching us. Not when we took a ride in the car, not when we went down to see the Christmas trees, not when we went to Highland Beach. There was no time at which he was not a teacher. And I think that's the essence of why he regarded his role at Howard University in training of the surgeons to be part of the essential component of his life.
Yeah. And that teaching and mentorship, obviously, Dr. Cornwell, you've seen up close in men, including your father, including Dr. LaFall, and from Dr. Syfax, all, I think, part of the lineage from Dr. Drew. So maybe you could share your perspectives on, what he left in his legacy.
I would love to. And first of all, I also thank you for the invitation. We're sitting here in the building where I was born, the old Freedmen's Hospital. So this was a labor of love for me in my part in passing on the Drew legacy. He died 76 years ago, quite some time before I was even born. And yet I, along with you and thousands of other medical students, learned about him largely through the efforts of many, but particularly Dr. LaSalle LaFall, who was a 20-year-old sophomore medical student in the last lecture Dr. Drew ever gave, March 31st, 1950. And Dr. LaFall put together the 24 hours of the last day of Dr. Drew's life, all the way up until the auto crash that took place in Alamance County, North Carolina, and him being declared dead early Saturday morning, April 1st. Dr. LaFall, in keeping with our own traditions, really through oral history, has educated thousands of medical students about that. And during the 13 years that I was chair of the department, and the 5 years since, every program director that has worked with us during the times when we interview senior medical students who want to be considered to do their surgical residency at Howard University, I always took it upon myself to accomplish an enviable task, talking to young people about inspirations that we get many decades later. And it's hard to tell the story about the mission, the core vision, and the inspirations of the barriers that we face today without going back to Dr. Drew and the even larger barriers that he faced in his day. And so that continues to be a labor of love.
And so with that in mind, as we think today, we still have the same number of black males going into medical school every year by percentage. We have almost a static number of black physicians across the country graduating every year. We still have Howard leading in terms of sending black males and females to medical school. Sometimes it's daunting when we think of the task and we think of his excellence and we think of where probably we feel we should be. Both of you have been involved in universities, and I'd love to get both of your perspectives on what you think must be done today and how should we look at that? Should we look at it as a challenge, as a bit of failure, or opportunity?
It's a challenge and an opportunity, in my opinion. I start with the thought that anyone that brings energy and interest to the pursuit of clinical and academic excellence, and in our case, around surgical diseases where outcome disparities exist, we still have significant barriers. Now, when you look at the photos of Dr. Drew with his trainees, they were all men in the 1940s. He's chair of the department from 1941 to 1950. But during the time of you and subsequently me coming through in our leadership positions within the department, 43% of the surgical residents graduating during the 13 years I was chair were women. We have people of color from not just the United States, but from the diaspora, from all over the world. We're really a rainbow coalition of people that are coming with that interest. So yes, we're predominantly people of color, but when you walk and you see patients, workers, staff, physicians, and yes, trainees here at Howard University, you see them from across the whole spectrum. And many people, if not most people affiliated with Howard and Friedman's before that, didn't realize that ours was one of the first both gender and racial, ethnic, diverse institutions created out of inclusion, not exclusion. Now, sure enough, if others, if majority surgeons, physicians, teachers, and professors chose to affiliate it, sometimes they might be pariahs in their own communities, but it's been that way going all the way back to 1867. So I see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, and I love that perspective because, as you rightly pointed out, the number of women surgeons the department has produced over time has certainly expanded. And to be quite frank, I think we probably led the way on that gender issue long before Howard University had the first woman dean of a dental school anywhere in the country, black or white. And I think, set that tone early. But obviously, as a former university administrator and obviously seeing and living your father's legacy up close, what is your perspective about the situation today as it comes to our trainees, our students, etc., and what are your suggestions for what we should be focused on?
Well, I think I want to say two things, math and inspiration. I think it's really important that we have the math skills early on because there's every academic test that is going to be done that's going to test those skills. And those skills, rather the scores from those skills, are what's going to be measured in the application to college and medical school. And you're going to look at, those who are looking at the applications will look at performance as well as inspiration. And so both of those things matter. The way that you have performed in your early career and your inspiration for wanting to go on. That's the kind of person, man or woman, who is going to be a part of this medical community and every medical community that wants to inspire people of color to be in medicine. It is important that the AMA understand that there is an intentionality to produce more people of color who are not only within medicine, but they are also a part of the AMA as well as the NMA. And that it is important to understand that there are some who do understand that. I had the great pleasure of going to the AMA with my husband, Dr. DeMaurice Moses, and the president had already read the 400-page thesis. He was the president of the AMA at the time. And I said that's exactly what is necessary. It is necessary for the larger community to understand the contributions of Dr. Drew. It is necessary for them to understand the seminal findings of Dr. Drew with respect to the preservation of blood and in the form of plasma that served during the Second World War to save soldiers throughout this country. I remember that the German soldiers, I remember reading, or my husband told me about the German soldiers who, during the war, understood that their soldiers did not have access to blood plasma, but our soldiers did. And that's because of the contributions of Dr. Drew. Those are the kinds of things that give me great pride And if we're going to continue to produce more like the two of you, we must make sure that we have early inspiration and early math skills.
And I love both of those. You know, I often tell people success in math is closely linked to reading comprehension. If you do not read and understand the question well, you don't get it there. So I love the fact that you focus on math skills and on the inspiration part. And I probably want to stay on the inspiration part a bit, because one of the things that always stands out to me about your father, Dr. Drew, was that he always stood on a certain moral ground, regardless of what was happening around him in terms of the politics, in terms of how people wanted to use his discoveries, etc. He always stood there. And I thought the title of your book, when I first saw it, I thought absolutely on point. Genius, certainly, but the Unbroken resonated in a way. And maybe you could speak to why you chose such a title.
Well, I'd like to tell you that I chose it, but it was really Dr. Miller. But I think it is important that he discovered it. Dr. Miller is not of our race, but he is of our intellect. And it was important to him to read this book once he had done the book on Dr. DeBakey. And he understood the hurdles that African Americans have to go through in order to achieve. And he understood that at Amherst College, where my father was an extraordinary athlete, he was not allowed to be with the team when they ate. He understood the segregation that was imposed upon him, and yet he was an unbroken genius. And the genius part of really came from his parents. My grandmother rather, was a college graduate. She graduated from Howard University in 1901. My grandfather was a man of extraordinary achievement within the unions. And so he came from people who understood achievement. But I think Dr. Miller's perspective was, well, it was a new one. Look at what Dr. Drew had to do to achieve in a community that didn't have an expectation of achievement. He did not understand that you and I and Dr. Cornwell and our parents had an expectation of achievement. And I think that it became part of why this title is so important. Genius, unbroken. In other words, the intellect could not be broken by the hurdles that had been required of us. And I think from his perspective, this was the perfect title.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And so, Dr. Cornwell, you know, one of the things that has always impressed me is, especially when I look at the chairs of surgery, including yourself, and handing that down, the constant thread of that striving for excellence, that discipline that Dr. Drew Jarvis has mentioned, which we see consistently. And obviously, Dr. Drew was multi-talented. We talk a lot about his intellect, but he also was a well-accomplished athlete, and so on. And I'm wondering, what are some of the traits you see today that you think young people can take from how Dr. Drew developed and applied his talents in order to be successful?
I go to a memo written by his research mentor, Dr. Scudder, who was a member of the Department of Surgery, but his mentor around that important research that they did on plasma preservation that made blood transfusions possible and change for those of us that operate in areas where there's big blood loss, trauma, transplant, cardiac surgery. We really have to pay homage to Dr. Drew every time we do a big major case. But I think about the words used by his research mentor. First of all, he had a fellowship that allowed him to go to Columbia University. Alan O'Fowler Whipple was the chair of the Department of Surgery there, chair from 1921 to 1946, and allowed him to work with Dr. Scudder. Initially, it was just a research position. And Scudder talked about this man with a biologic clock of untold energy, a character marked by mirth, the altogether charming. He was one of the great surgical scientists of the first half of the 20th century. That's how he described Dr. Drew. And then the thing that inspires me to this day, and I try to transmit it to young trainees, is what the residents at Columbia Presbyterian said. A position opened up where we had a chance to get some more clinical training. Surgeons of color back then had to carve out opportunities, a couple years here, a couple years in Alabama, a couple years in DC, maybe a couple years up in Columbia. And there was an opportunity for him to take part in some of the clinical training while he was there. The chair wrote a letter the first year. He's not to eat in the cafeteria with the other residents. Not Mississippi, Alabama. It's New York City in the 1930s, right? But after the first year, after the other residents were exposed to this man with the character of mirth and wit and a biologic clock of untold energy, the second year renewal letter says the residents insist that he eats with them. Did they just get morality and ethics after 1 year? No. And I often talk about that. As you know, if you're one of the few minorities on a faculty, you're always asked to serve on what? The admissions committee or the diversity committee. And I've always said it won't work. It won't have legs if it's about quotas or white guilt. It's about people understanding that there's a lot of people that can do this job when given opportunities. The residents insist that he eats with them. And that Drew story in the 1930s still resonates to me 90 years later.
Yeah, and I think that's, to your point, is fascinating about the human condition, which at times can be tested. As you said, it can be left unbroken, but it's also interesting that it has the capacity to grow and have that type of grace. And I think his ability to convince and to move so many people off of where they would have landed is so important. So with that in mind, as we begin to wrap up, what would you like readers to take away from the book, most importantly?
First of all, thank you for acknowledging the presence of the book. It's a really, really important one because Dr. Miller, or to me, because Dr. Miller not only did the biography, but he looked at all of the things that we had that were personal, that related to Dr. Drew's personality, that told about the man, because he was not just a scientist, he was not just a surgeon, he was not just a man who was committed to a way of life in surgery. He was a humanist. He loved opera. He could be funny. In front of my mother, he could be hilarious, because my mother was insistent on not being quite the same frame of mind as women in that time. And I remember that she dropped a great many plates on the ground, and my father turned to her as he was reading his paper. "Lenore?" She said, "Did I get your attention?" So he was a man who was quite devoted to the things that made his life possible, my life possible, your lives possible, as you're telling me, because he's in your thinking. He's in your head. He's in your thoughts about what kind of surgeon you want to be, and that makes me terrifically proud.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we certainly owe a debt of gratitude to him, and I think, one of the things that I've always benefited from, the experience of being trained by men who directly have interacted with every single surgical chair. I like to tell people from Dr. Drew's time, come on down, and that has been a very humbling experience when I think of having the opportunity to interact with Syfax and Dr. LaFall and
Dr. White,
Dr. Cornwall, and Dr. Callender. I mean, it's been a remarkable experience. So with that in mind, there's a choice that people have today that they can make. AI is taking off in an incredible way. There are lots of people going into science and really bending that way. There's a lot to distract you. Why surgery, and why become the next Charles Drew today?
Well, the reason why surgery is because it's the highest calling, as we are taught by one of Dr. Drew's prize students, Dr. LaFall. It's a part of the noblest profession that you can enter, helping people regain and retain their health, without which nothing else matters. But You mentioned AI and the technical changes that have taken place. You and I are blessed because we had one person that kept that Drew legacy alive. He made it part of the 8-week rotation that third-year medical students take on surgery, most of whom will not go into surgery, to talk about Charles Drew, keeping with our traditions of the oral word, keeping much of our, going all the way back to slavery and on other continents. And so I now are inspired by what the next level of technology should be, which is the fact that you go to the African American Museum, there's no formal exhibit on Charles Drew. And when I found that out about 18 months ago and gave a presentation to the curator, he gave me a long story about the many steps, dozens of them, legislative and administrative steps that would take to add to it. We have athletes and entertainers, but not a Spingarn Award winner. Every Spingarn Award winner from the NAACP you would think would be your baseline foundation of who would be in that museum. So I think we need, in this day of, thankfully Dr. LaFall with his longevity got us to this point. Dr. Drew's exhibit needs to be in that museum. And we need champions, so perhaps the Congressional Black Caucus, to help us scale those important hurdles to keep his legacy alive.
Well, you've left us a good charge, and my next assignment today actually is down to meet with one of our senators, so you probably just changed my agenda. I appreciate it very much. What a powerful and meaningful conversation. I want to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Charlew Drew Jarvis and Dr. Edward Cornwell for joining us and for helping to illuminate the fullness of Dr. Charles R. Drew's life, his intellect, his integrity, his humanity, and his enduring impact. We are reminded that legacy is not simply something we honor. It is something we carry. It is something we must protect, and it is something we pass forward through purpose, through leadership, and through service. Dr. Drew's story is not only a story of historic achievement, it is a blueprint for how to live with excellence and conscience, even in the face of adversity. And at Howard University, we remain committed to ensuring that his legacy remains not only remembered, but lived. Thank you for joining us on The Journey. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick, and we'll see you next time.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at WHUT.org. Thank you.